Okay, so, there's a problem that we believe is out there in the world. People remember content. Databases, except for a very few, even today, are keyed by text, and sometimes the content cannot be adequately expressed as text, and therefore search engines such as Google haven't necessarily been the thing you would want to use. You just saw me just test out Tunebot, which is our search engine, which you can already tell what it is. It's a query by humming thing. And this is a working system, so this. Now, again, if I just mentioned Google, you're going to look at these numbers and laugh at how small they are, right? But I just wanted to point out, we've had a few tens of thousands of queries and contributions. This is I should say, a crowdsourced search engine. So everything you compare to when we search was donated by someone who actually got onto our website and chose to teach Tunebot a song. And so we've got tens of thousands of contributions and queries, and so far this is summed up to only about 5,500 songs. And a few years ago that would have been impressive. Today it's not, but hey. I will, however, say that besides being a working system, this is a research system, so we're kind of trying to serve two sets of needs. And in fact, they're not two sets of needs, because one of the problems with most query by humming research, I would almost say, except for the SoundHound guys who are actually got a company going, and maybe us, all query by humming research is you would take 1 or 2 zeros off the numbers here for most of the work that's happening, because none of them have systems up on the web that are actually collecting real queries. And so a thing that we want to be doing, and I'll tell you some of the blocks on that we're hoping to get around, is to be providing the community sometime soon, I hope, access to actually start this field moving forward again a bit, besides in our lab, because with tens of thousands of queries and tens of thousands of examples, you can actually do some stuff that you can't do when you're talking in tens and hundreds. Okay, so this is the front end for Tunebot, which you just saw. It's a web-facing client that's written mostly in PHP with a little bit of JavaScript and ActionScript. That is our piece of shit. Are we being taped? Great. Should have asked that question before cursing. Front-end server, which I was just reminded during this talk, or not during this talk, during the prior talk, doesn't have an automatic reboot after a power outage. Apparently there was a power outage back at Northwestern, and our front-end server went down, and what you just saw me run was the front end that I had managed. I was a little bit paranoid, not paranoid enough. I saved an image of the front end that I could boot up on a virtual machine from my computer here, which just hit the back end, which our reliable backend server, which in fact does have a automatic reboot after power outage. So right now, the reason what I'm doing is I'm waiting for someone back in the lab to get into the office. It is, what is it, 2 p.m. Here? And that makes it slightly earlier than anyone in my lab shows up to press the on button. You may ask, why don't I have this all in the cloud? If I could put my front end on a disk image and then run the disk image from a virtual machine, the answer to that has to do with the nature of research funding. We got funded, the funding ended, and what I did was I bought 2 pieces of hardware anticipating this moment, because if I had been doing this on the cloud, I would be paying out of my own pocket right now for the servers. That's the way it works. You get a limited time window, then the money's cut off, and the National Science Foundation doesn't want to pay for 5 more years of web services on Amazon. Anyway, so this is Apache, MySQL, PHP, Tomcat, all that stuff. Our code base, this is how it splits up. And one thing you'll notice when you look at this is, okay, so I'll say the backend was written in Java. There's a PHP layer between the Java and the front end, which basically is what our API is coded in. There's also working in the background. There's some shell stuff, some Python, and I already mentioned JavaScript and ActionScript in the front end. So what we've got is a front end client, a back end server with an API. Typical Notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different languages or dialects of languages, and this has an impact on trying to keep something running. How many of you feel comfortable in all 6 languages? Okay, 2. How many of those people who raise their hands are students at a university? Yeah. This is all being run and maintained with a student workforce. These are some of the undergraduates, because it's in fact mostly been undergraduates working on this code. And they're pluses, they're bright, they're creative, they're enthusiastic. They value trying new things, making cool demos, building resumes. So I can get them motivated to make that first version. And we'll talk about what I can't get them motivated to do. They have minuses. They are inexperienced. They are very inexperienced. They are time crunched because, of course, this isn't their full-time job. This isn't even sometimes their part-time job. And they are short-term. What an undergraduate thinks of as a long-term time window is 2 academic terms, right? That's a really long time. 6 months of my life, that's a long time. They do not think in terms of keeping something going for 6 years or even sometimes for a whole academic year. And they absolutely do not value documentation, code maintenance, or testing. Okay? Why is that? Well, that's partially the fault of, how many people here are professors in computer science or something similar? Yeah, that's our fault. Because what we do is we teach them that one-off, just barely working, make it, forget about it, you'll never see it again, is what coding is about, right? We don't care about the clean code. We don't care about the documentation. We ran a test suite on it. It passed the 6 tests. You got an A-. Why is it an A-? I don't know. I don't like you. And that's it, right? And so they get this attitude like, that's life. And I think about what this means. You've got these people, by the way, this is just me getting on a soapbox. What if I told you that your building crew, the people who are going to make the building you live in, well, what did we do? Well, I taught them to build tree houses. I said, whatever you can get done in 1 week with this pile of boards and some nails, that's your building. And they built it, and we were like, great. I ran a hose over it. The rain didn't get inside. We said, that's a building. Now you go off and make the shard. Right? But that's typically what we're doing with our training. And he's smiling and nodding, so he knows what I'm saying is true. We send you out with that kind of training, and then we expect you to build robust, long-term, bulletproof, maintainable, well-documented systems. Speaking of which, long-term, this is Tunebot 1.0. What you saw was Tunebot 2.0. This is what we had going last year, I guess. And one of the first things you notice is it looks completely different. By the way, someone asked about design, and does anyone think of themselves as a designer? One of the undergrads thought of himself as a designer, and so this one was prettier than the new one in some ways. It's also written entirely in Flash for the front end, which the world is moving away from. The new one, we only a tiny bit was in Flash or ActionScript because we needed to record audio. And although someone was talking about moving to HTML5, mind you, I haven't checked in a couple of months, but I have yet to see HTML5 allow for easy recording. We've been forced into having at least the record button be in Flash. Anyway, I call this the lost system. Why do I call this the lost system? Because we got to a point where we couldn't. I had a bunch of code, and what I had nothing to do with what was running on the system. So why is that? Well, people have already mentioned to you use something like GitHub. This is our GitHub webpage, and so you can see a student was doing something recently, and they say to you, use source code control, publish your code. That's great. What the students will say back to you is, it's too hard. I have to click a button or type something, and then click another button or type something else. They'll say, the same thing about they're ashamed of their code thing. Yeah, I'm ashamed. It's just not done yet. I'll check it in when it's done. I swear to you, I'll check it in when it's done. When it's done. And then finally it's done. And you say, did you check it in? Of course. Yeah, I checked it in. And when you checked it in, you pushed it to the server, right? Because many of you may know this, if you have GitHub, Mercurial, some other thing. You can have situations where there's a local repository and the repository on the server, and unless you sync them, in fact, it doesn't matter that Joe Bob checked it in on his personal PC because it never got pushed up to the repository we're all sharing, and therefore it never got checked in. So we were using source code control on Tunebot 1.0. And it turned out that that didn't matter. Why? Because of these issues. First of all, the coders may not understand, not all of them will understand how to work the source code control. They may have actually thought they synced or whatever, and they didn't. Many of them, it's a long, slow process of convincing to get them to understand why they're doing this at all. Again, when you come in with the attitude that I'm going to be here for like 6 weeks and do this thing and then leave, you don't care about version control. You can keep it all in your head. You're never going to make a mistake. And besides, it's someone else's problem when I leave. And now, just because they understand why and how doesn't mean they will. Now, how many of you have worked in shops with source code control where people passively or not so passively resisted it? How many of you were those people? Yeah, of course, no one admits to that, right? And what I just said, what happened to me with Tunebot 1.0 was, in fact, as changes were being made, some students weren't checking in, other students weren't syncing with the server, and then when they were compiling, there was the ignorant person who assumed that they were compiling based on the checked-in synced code, but it was really, when you finally take a look at it, my hypothesis, because we never got to the bottom exactly, was that they were in fact linking to local libraries that they had compiled or had on their, some path on their hard drive, which was subsequently wiped after they left. Because you asked the question, was it all checked in? Is it all up on the server? Oh, yes, most certainly. So it's OK if we wipe your machine? Yes, it is. It's all good. And we lost the system. Had to remake it. So when someone says, put it on GitHub, make sure you publish it, what I'm saying is there's more to it than that. OK, in their first week, when they show up, why is source code control important? And now I can tell them the story about how we lost Tunebot 1.0. You have to actually watch them. What I mean is you sit there with them, you download a repository, you make a trivial change, you upload it, you go through all the processes, and then you sit there and look at them and go, now you. And you sit there with them while they do it. And you do not leave the room until all the steps in the process are complete, at least once. That doesn't mean they will do it, but that at least gets you by the, I didn't know how. They know how, right? Then you have to regularly check. Now, how many people know what GitHub is? How many people have ever used any of the monitoring tools in GitHub? Yeah, so you can get onto GitHub. I don't know if I'm on it right now. You can get onto GitHub and let me I would resize this if I can just find, there we go. And you can look at people's contributions over time. You can look at their commitment activity over time. Are they committing code? And you can, and this isn't hard for you to do as a project team leader. Once a week, all you have to do is glance at these things, and then you'll say, well, that's funny. I don't know why Joe Bob is my go-to example for the person who's doing things wrong. Joe Bob here hasn't committed any code in a week, yet we had a face-to-face meeting, and he claimed that he'd been doing work. So what is it? Are you doing work or are you not doing work? And you have to get them to understand that you don't count it as work unless it's up there. right? So you have to regularly verify that they're actually checking in stuff. And the other thing I learned to my great sorrow is you have to regularly verify that the checked in code is what is in fact running on your server, right? Because there's going to be this temptation on the part of someone, okay, yeah, I gotta go, I'm getting 5 minutes, the experiment needs to be run today, I'm just going to change something locally, copy it over to the right folder in the server, and we're good, right? And this is how things happen. And you got a result, or you've got a working system, or you think you do, and 6 months later when you want to reproduce the results with all these reproducible results stuff that we've been talking about, and you swore that all the code was checked in, you've been following these people, but there was that one moment where they copied something up there, and now your deployed system, the system you're testing, is not in fact what's in your code base. Let's talk about Tunebot for iPhone. This one I like to call the Orphan. Now, we made a lovely iPhone version. You can actually see screenshots from it here. Tunebot for iPhone was written to talk to Tunebot 1.0. By the way, I didn't properly insist on having good documentation of the API, right? So what happened when Tunebot 1.0 died is Tunebot, the Orphan here, was designed to talk to an API which we didn't have a spec for. And we made a new spec. This one didn't conform to it. Oh, no problem. Who in the lab at this point, today, right now, is an iPhone developer? What? They both graduated? Oh, okay. So what do we have? We don't have the developer. The original developer is gone. We don't have anyone who develops for this particular system. I don't know Objective-C. I got a student to do that. I've still got all the Objective-C code here. In fact, if I removed the Objective-C from the Codebase percentages there. In fact, a third of our code is a bunch of Objective-C for an iPhone client, which was written for iOS 5. What version of iOS are we on now? We're about to go to 7. The Orphan. Okay, let's talk about why documentation is so awesome. Did I mention to you that our POS front end died on me? Oh my God, I'm about to demo this thing. What on earth am I going to do? I am panicking. Luckily, in our wiki that I insisted on for Tunebot 2.0, I had this lovely, I actually wrote these notes to myself about 6 months ago, thinking that I might run into a situation like this, where I reminded myself of how to deploy the front end on a virtual machine, and in fact that I had saved off a disk image for just such an emergency. Yay. I had literally forgotten all about it. Documentation isn't just for the other person, it's for you 6 months later, as someone had mentioned already, where they were... Anyway, so what you're going to hear is if I comment the code before finishing it, the comments won't be correct. They finished it now. No time to document. I have bugs to fix. Okay, the bugs are fixed. The thing is done. Well, my well-written code is self-commenting. Can't you just read the source code? I refer you back to the problem where you take a new person on a new, someone who's going to grab your Objective-C code and try and read it and understand it and make it work in iOS 7 with the new API. You just don't even know what pain is until you try and do something like this. And I've actually gotten comments like this, like for headers for a file that says, sorts the input for the file inputsorter.php. Now, how... I have to sit there with them, and you have to do this too. If you're really a project lead, you have to freaking sit there with them, and you have to look at that and ask them seriously, what are you thinking? right? And then you have to make them do it again. And my favorite is, I already know how to do this. Why write that down? I already explained why. Okay, so what am I saying? You have to document your source code, your API functionality, your installation process for your reproducible research. You can have all sorts of installation issues that change how things work. You know this. You link to a different library. Whoops. Maintenance process, testing process. So what am I saying? Write the document before you write the code. Students hate this. Everybody hates this. Even I hate it. But it helps. Sometimes I actually make you write the paper where we actually lay out the experiment before we write the code. Why? Because if we know what tests we want to do, it actually tells us what kind of code we want to write. I've said all this. This is something I haven't said yet. Once you've got all this stuff in place, then, okay, he's done a great job. Now I walk over to Mark. And I say, Mark, here's the website with the wiki. Install it and run the test script. If Mark can't do it, then I mentioned data sharing. We have about 100,000 WAV files that we are storing off-site and on-site. Yeah, all this applies to experiments. We have issues here. I would love to share the data. The NSF would love me to share the data. The IRB would love me to never share the data. The RIAA, I'm sorry, Internal Review Board Governing Human Subject Studies. The IRB says that people singing need their privacy, even though they sang it to a website. The NSF says I'm supposed to share it with everyone, even though the NSF also says I have to get the IRB's approval. And the RIAA, which is the Recording Industry Association of America, claims that any sung example is, of course, an instantiation of a copyrighted work that they own the publishing rights to and therefore owe them money. Yeah, I'm still negotiating this conundrum. We've got all this data. We'd love to share it. I'm talking to the IRB people, and I'm not talking to the Recording Industry Association. But I'm hoping that a friend of mine who's an entertainment lawyer can give me a good reading on whether 100,000 30-second sung examples of music still constitutes fair use, which is what academics typically hide behind in the United States. Fair use means that for teaching purposes we can share stuff with you. I don't know. When I do know, I will love to share this data with you guys, and I'm probably out of time, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a question. Anyone got a question?
So, again, I'll get two questions into one here really quick. The first one being, with the source code monitoring, when you're working with institutes or things like that, do you think that could cause them some undue anxiety?
Undue anxiety?
Yeah,
No.
using data.
Not undue anxiety.
Okay.
I want it to cause them anxiety.
Okay, you want to stress them
Because
out.
if they're relaxed about it, they won't do it. I know this.
The other question is obviously there are educational reasons why you want to have undergrad researchers, that kind of thing. But what was the reasoning behind that as opposed to hiring a staff programmer?
Oh, well, there's multiple reasons. One is the first one that you just said, educational reasons. I am at an educational institution, and one of my jobs is to teach undergrads how to do this.
Yeah.
Another is to get a competent full-time programmer will cost me $200,000 a year once we count grant overhead, which I simply can't afford. So it's actually a 2-in-1. And the good news is, when you put the undergrads through this, once they understand that this is what they're supposed to be doing, and in fact, when they start asking their friends who have already graduated and are out in the real world, they discover this is in fact what you're supposed to be doing. They do it. They quit bitching about it. They get it done. We got a thing up, and then magically they get really good jobs, because coming back to this not exactly publishing, but I had one of the undergrads that I had shown you a picture of. He was a music major, and he went out on the, he went out for a job, and when they asked him about, you're a music major, what are you doing here applying at places like Facebook, he pointed them to a website that he developed with a search engine, talked to them about source code control, documentation, making APIs, and they hired him. And in fact, every one of the students who's gone through this has gotten a really good job, and one of them was a project lead at Microsoft for their Xbox and some of their audio work they were doing. So actually 3 of them have ended up project leads within a year or 2 of being out, which it's not like it never happens for anyone, but it's happening for them faster because they already know how to do all this stuff that other people they don't. So anyway, it seemed like there was one more I'll get on you.
If the data is anonymized, why is this a problem with IRB?
Define anonymization.
We don't have their names and phone numbers.
Okay, I agree with you,
Yeah.
but I'm not the person making the call.
Okay, so
One of the things that I've been asked to do, which I am actually fighting against, is, or one possibility that's been discussed with me, which I'm fighting against, a ruling hasn't been made, is that I should extract features and make the features available, which is a common approach. But one of the things that I'd hoped to do for the community was provide them the initial raw audio itself. I hope in the end that the people in charge will agree with you and agree with me, and then I'll just release the audio. We'll see. Thank you.